Okay, good morning. I call the meeting to order. Just two announcements before we start. Since the 9th of March 2018, the Select Committee has received 6 late representations. The committee has deliberated and we have decided to accept all of them and will take them into consideration. Now, one of the written representations was made by the Russian ambassador to Singapore, Mr. Andrei Tatarinov, on what Russia is doing to combat online falsehoods. You are grateful for the ambassador for his representation, and we will be publishing that later, together with the other late representations. We have also made some slight adjustments for today's hearing schedule. We have moved Mr. Gaurav Keerthi to be the first witness, and the remaining witnesses will follow as scheduled. May I now invite the witness to come forward to the witness table? For the record, could you state your name and the position you hold in your organization?
Good morning. My name is Gaurav Keerthi, and I'm the founder of 2 websites, confirm.sg and dialectic.sg.
Yeah, thank you. The evidence which we will be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. If you so desire, you can take an affirmation. Clerk, could you please administer the oath?
I, Gaurav Keerthi, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome to the public hearing on the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus for today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. And I now call on Dr. Janil to ask the questions.
Good morning, Mr. Keerthi, and thank you for coming here to join us. What I would propose to do is perhaps to ask you some questions with respect to the issue of deliberate online falsehoods, so that we sort of have at least a common frame of understanding as to what it is we're trying to do and what our view is on the situation. Perhaps then I'll take you through your submission and ask you for some clarifications and further points on your submission, and then we could have a little bit of a discussion on where we go from there, before I then hand the floor to my colleagues who may have some further questions for you. To what extent do you think deliberate online falsehoods are a significant and serious problem?
As someone who reads the news, I do understand the seriousness of the issue, and I think that the potential impact for malicious individuals who seek to undermine or destabilize a country, the potential is there, and I think it is a serious issue, sir.
So you would agree in terms of the potential impact that you talked about undermining our country. Would you agree then that this could be a threat to us in a variety of ways? One would be our social cohesion. Secondly, perhaps our peace and stability. Potentially even a threat to our national security. But at a much more sort of ongoing, insidious level, a threat to the trust that we place in institutions, organizations, and entities, such as the media, academia, the websites that you run.
So you're right. I think there are potentials for online falsehood to be a threat to all of these issues. The domain that I work in particularly is on education, and I work with young debaters. I do see some aspects of individuals having concerns about the information that they read online. And so the last point you mentioned about trust in institutions, including things like my websites, are an issue of concern. And that's what we're trying to address as well.
So overall, you'd agree that the status quo is unacceptable?
Absolutely, which is why actually we are trying, well, my volunteer groups are trying to step up and do what we can.
Okay. Mr. Keerthi, in your submission, you've made 4 recommendations about how we might go forward. If I could begin with the first, you were suggesting that we need to focus some efforts at the level of educating students. You've mentioned critical reading, debating, the ability to disagree without disrespect. You feel that we need to do more in this space?
Absolutely, sir. If I could raise 2 points. So I've been involved in debate education since about 1998, and I started off doing debate education for students in classrooms, kind of academic competitive debating. But over the years, I realized that the problem was not how people interacted in person, but how they interacted online. So I moved to doing online debate education as well. One of the gap areas that I discovered is the process of my research for developing dialectic.sg is that today we teach students perhaps how to debate in classrooms, but we don't teach them how to debate online. We don't teach online commenting and interacting in the online world, which is increasingly becoming a very important skill. We don't sufficiently convey to them the importance of being critical in the information that they pass online. And I think there's a start now, but I think a lot more can be done. I've been an advocate for pushing debates in schools for a very long time, and I think it would be useful for young minds to be able to look at all the information they receive with a fairly critical lens, be able to challenge that information, counter-check, counterbalance, and hopefully as a process of that come up with their own conclusions which are able to counteract the effect of fake news.
Okay. We'll return to your various points, but let's take you through, you take us through your submission. The second point that you made was that there needed to be a source of truth. I believe you've labeled it as an online source of facts.
Yes.
That there is an information vacuum which somehow generates further opportunity for fake information or deliberate online falsehoods. And you are suggesting that a further provision of information might aid in this?
Perhaps if I could explain the point in a bit more detail. Today in my interactions with young debaters, they try to make an argument, and in order to support the argument, we ask them to provide evidence. In certain situations, for good reasons, information is not made publicly available, nor is it released by the government. And there are good reasons for some of those decisions. But when individuals are trying to provide evidence for their cases and the evidence is not available, they need to rely on educated guesses sometimes. And these educated guesses sometimes are based on incorrect assumptions, and they're sometimes wrong. When they start to comment online with these incorrect assumptions and incorrect educated guesses, it essentially becomes sharing of an opinion that's based on incorrect facts. If more facts were available and were more easily researchable, I think this would help in the situation. As with the issues that we've seen in the online conversations on dialectic, when facts are scarce, people postulate, speculate, and tend to make rather broad guesses at what the truth could be. And those are areas in which they may rely on facts which may not turn out to be facts at all.
Okay. Your third suggestion, you've called it engaging tools to sift fact from fiction, where I presume, with some degree of bias, you suggest that some of the tools that you have produced may be of use in our attempts to deal with this. But your larger point is that we need to counter this online through further platforms?
My point is that we need to find new ways of engaging individuals online as well as offline. I think the traditional method of providing the information and hoping that they read it may no longer be tenable. If you look at the way that young people consume information today, actually the patterns have changed quite dramatically, and I think you saw that in the previous few days when they were testifying that young people consume both news as well as information fundamentally differently. What I hoped to do and what I was trying to do with my platforms, which I agree are not the solution and are far from perfect, but are an attempt to rethink how people can absorb information, how we can challenge their assumptions. If I could elaborate just a little bit on the second website, which is confirm.sg. In about 2017, I became very worried about the state of online conversations, in particular to what they were leading up to for democratic elections. And I noticed that people tended to be stuck in filter bubbles and echo chambers. Filter bubbles are basically algorithms that Google designs or search engines design to provide you tailored information, but they end up feeding your predisposed biases. Echo chambers are basically your social networks. They share stories that you already agree with, and so you don't get exposed to the other side. And I tried very hard to see whether we could break these two in a novel way. So looking at how young people were participating in quiz games online, which Harry Potter character are you? I thought maybe a fun way to challenge their perceptions would be interesting. I designed a quiz game based on central issues, themes, different areas where I thought there might be misperceptions, and made it easily accessible for people to try out. What I did notice was, because I was collecting demographic information as well as quiz results, I noticed that there were certain demographic profiles that shared certain types of misperceptions. And many of the participants later expressed that they were fundamentally surprised that the perceptions were wrong, that the facts actually countered their perceptions. So it's not that they were trying to spread online falsehoods in their views. They were just fundamentally unaware that their worldview was wrong. One of the quizzes that we ran was on income inequality in Singapore. And when we ran it with over 2,000 participants, 70% of participants did not know the correct answer to whether our income inequality was increasing or decreasing over the last 10 years. And so the information that they share with their friends, that they post online, and the stories that feed their worldview will probably likely be based on false facts. So being able to uncover findings like this, I think provide different ways of which we can provide targeted education. And so it's slightly different as an approach. Admittedly, I am not a data analyst, nor am I an expert in designing quizzes, but it's an interesting start, and I thought more could be done in this area to find out where the pockets of echo chambers, filter bubbles, and kind of demographic echoes of information that is false exist, and we could target that.
Thank you. Your fourth suggestion, you've titled it Debate Forum, but essentially is tying together your first three suggestions about the role that public debate may have in dealing with the issue of deliberate online falsehoods and malicious attempts to manipulate our perceptions.
Yes. The fourth suggestion is basically, as you pointed out, sir, my attempt to try and bring all of this together. I strongly believe, again, that debate is a useful process. In debate, we do not penalize the debater when they have an incorrect assumption or an incorrect fact. We let the process of debate itself expose the weakness in the argument, expose the weakness in the evidence. And as a result of that thesis, antithesis, and eventually synthesis, both the participants as well as the observers of that debate come away feeling enriched, and they understand the issue a lot more clearly. One of the things that we've noticed with Dialectic as a website was that many people come there to visit it to understand both sides of arguments on various issues such as death penalty, national service for women, and all they're doing is they're reading. They don't want to participate, but they want to understand what both points of view are, and that to and fro between the debaters helps educate everyone. So having more platforms like that where people can engage robustly, I think, is important and relevant and actually useful. What I am worried about is what I would hope to see is that should any law be passed, we can nuance it such that individuals do not feel afraid of participating in online discussions, even in areas where they're not certain of the facts, so that they can go through this to and fro, clarify their own thinking, and educate the wider public who are watching these debates as well.
Well, perhaps we'll come back to that, and I hope you will walk away feeling enriched as a result of our debate, as I try to challenge some of your ideas and expose what I believe are some weaknesses. But before we get to that, you've perhaps been following some of the other submissions and discussions we've had. Have you perhaps had a chance to familiarize yourself with the comments made by Dr. Carol Soon and some of our other colleagues with respect to the biases that we have when we consume news and when we receive information, and how these can confirm, strengthen, and reinforce our pre-existing bias?
Broadly, yes.
And you agree with that we're presented with two pieces of information. The information that confirms our existing worldview is far more likely to be consumed and understood.
I would agree with that, but again, I would caveat that, for example, in the confirm.sg case, many individuals actually found themselves being challenged and actually changed their points of view because it was a non-threatening area of education. It was not a didactic, kind of expository form of this is wrong and this is why you are wrong. It was a novel, fun, lighthearted, and therefore they were open to the fact that they might be wrong.
Similarly, some of the people commenting have spoken about reach and impact, that as we deal with some of these things, we have to consider how far and how fast a piece of information travels. And one of the comments has been, of course, that the falsehood travels further and faster than the truth. And we've had some submissions to suggest that there's data to back that up. You would agree with that?
I'm not an expert in the area, but again, just from quiz data alone, it seems that some falsehoods do gain some traction.
So just by merely presenting the correct facts in the same way, to the same level of presentation or reach as a falsehood, wouldn't actually necessarily be sufficient to counter the falsehood?
I would agree with that.
Would you agree also that there's a significant possibility that attempts to manipulate the information that we are presented with maliciously may have already started?
Again, I'm not an expert in this particular domain. The young individuals who I work with when they research topics are exposed to a variety of information, some of which, as you mentioned, is not accurate. As to whether it's deliberately or hostilely manipulated, I am not aware.
But is it possible, is it a reasonable assumption that it's possible that actors have already started doing this?
Based on what I read from what's happening in other countries, I think it's certainly possible that it's happened in every country.
Do you think it's reasonable also to assume that prior to the advent of the internet and online and platforms and social media, there were offline attempts to manipulate our perception from outside our borders?
Again, I'm out of my depth here, but I would assume that it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, various other witnesses and people have made submissions to this effect and making this argument that it has now translated into the online space. So, if I could return then to your suggestions. When you talk about education as a means to deal with this, I'd like to challenge you about the potential ultimate reach of this. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not necessary, but is it sufficient? Would you agree that the problem with education as a solution to this is that those cognitive and behavioral biases, such as what I referred to in Dr. Sun's submission, would not be dealt with adequately as a result of education alone?
My hope is that if we can start training them from a very young age in the schools, you can train them to not be so easily influenced by such biases. And in fact, my own experience is that being aware that these biases exist already is a level of defense against the biases.
But my point being that, Dr. Sun's point and many other academics' point is that some of these biases are not on the basis of what you know, or not on the basis of the facts that you have in your head, but really about some of the hardwired behaviors that we have as human beings. So the education can deal with some of the issues about ignorance, but not necessarily about behaviors.
Yeah, I would be out of my depth to comment on that, but I'll accept the point, sir.
Okay. Would you also agree that the issue with education as a solution is that it doesn't get around the strategies of deliberate targeting that some of the social media companies engage with? And we talked a lot about this yesterday with the tech companies, that because they take pains to target certain individuals, certain communities, certain types of consumer behavior, education alone is not going to allow you to overcome that type of targeting.
My personal view is that education alone is never going to be a sufficient solution for any challenge, but education alone is a very important and probably a very large part of the solution. In this particular case, my interactions with young debaters as they grow up indicates that they tend to be a little bit more wary of information, and they're prepared to challenge the information that they see online, even information that fits their own worldviews.
If I could move to your suggestion of a source of truth, and if we are talking about facts as opposed to opinions and commentary, can I put it to you that there are some problems with that suggestion as a way of dealing with deliberate online falsehoods? Firstly, ultimately, for the issues that we are dealing with, national security, social cohesion, the strength of our identity as a people, the source of that truth may well have to be the state if there are facts around sensitive matters that are being debated. And so whoever you set up as this online source of truth may ultimately have to draw the validity of that truth from the state, from the government. And so would there then be benefit in just having it as the state or the government as the source of truth?
I suppose my research in larger countries indicates that it is possible to have a neutral and independent perspective on the source of truth. While you're right, many of the data points would be gathered by the government, an independent lens can still be provided to provide an additional perspective on that information, or provide alternative sources of information, whether it's from international data comparisons or third-party surveys, third-party data collection. But so you're right, the majority of the data today would be collected by the government.
In those societies or those jurisdictions with independent third-party institutions, are deliberate online falsehoods less likely or more likely to spread currently?
I would not be able to comment on that.
Would you agree that perhaps in today's setting it isn't necessarily different?
Fair.
The other issue I would have with an online source of truth is that the way such truth is consumed requires behavior. You have to go and seek it out. So it doesn't overcome the issue of bias if you choose to not have that worldview challenged. Would you agree with that? There's a limit to how far this can work.
If I put together my earlier points with this point, actually, if we train enough individuals in debate, and if individuals are taught how to comment online in a respectful, robust, and rational way, there's a tendency to want to seek out evidence to support comments that you make. And if you read the kind of comments, blog posts, and just kind of general sharing that young debaters put online as compared to the average individual who may not be debate trained, you may find that they tend to be a little bit more willing to seek out that information. So the behavior does change if we go upstream and target them through education.
But potentially, by having a repository of truth somewhere, you still require for people to believe that that is true.
Yes.
You require for people to come to you,
Yes.
and you require for people to understand and believe what is.
And trust in the institutions.
So the fundamental starting position is that the people that we're trying to reach must trust in the process. So anything that undermines that trust in institutions, trust in the ability for institutions to derive authority and truth, will undermine any of these efforts.
I would agree.
And your suggestion about having this source of truth, you're not suggesting that the truth around facts occurs through contestation.
There are some areas in which the facts themselves are not clear. If I could raise just one simple anecdote. Recently, a friend of mine shared an article that coffee causes cancer. A few days later, another friend shared an article that coffee does not cause cancer. Now, one of my friends must be wrong. It cannot both cause and not cause cancer at the same time. But in this area, I think the scientific community themselves are not quite clear on what the facts are. So there are some areas, I use this as a simple example, but there are some areas in which the facts themselves are not clear.
Okay. And so even with an online or some ultimate source of truth, there's still plenty of room for speculation.
There's still plenty of room for debate, sir.
Okay. Part of the problem I have with the various solutions that you have suggested is, well, would you agree that some of it is a selected, self-selecting audience?
Today, it's a self-selecting audience consisting primarily of young debaters who I interact with and engage with in schools. But again, if more young students are required to understand debate, I think the audience of self-selecting individuals would be much larger.
But do you think it in any way compares to the reach and impact, the audience that, viral tweets and cartoons like we've had put up over the last few days, and these are reaching millions and millions of people in very rapid order? The process that you're describing of educating children over years in schools, persuading them to come and learn about critical thinking and debate, and then providing a source of truth that they can refer to should they have questions. I mean, this is a very different order of reach, but also it's a time scale which is several orders of magnitude different from the problem that we're trying to deal with. You'd agree with that asymmetry?
I would agree.
I mean, I would, and I think all the members of the panel and most Singaporeans would largely support the idea that it has to start with education, it has to start with an informed public, and we need to provide sources of truth, but I'm trying to establish just how insufficient these may be given the threat that we face. Your wrapping up suggestion of how public debate has a role to play in informing citizenry, would you agree that if we scope the issue to a deliberate online falsehood, there is no role, I put it to you, for a deliberate online falsehood in any kind of constructive public debate?
Against many of the individuals who in my forums share comments that are based on untrue facts are not aware that they are untrue facts, and some of them actually have genuine misperceptions about the issue. So deliberate online falsehoods, while they don't know that they are online falsehoods, they are being shared because the individuals are trying to engage in a robust and respectful debate.
No,
so if we can...
Yeah, but you're referring to individuals who are several steps
Yes.
down the chain. I'm
Yes.
referring specifically to the act of spreading, of creating, spreading, and targeting a deliberate online falsehood. I'm not referring to the unwilling, unwitting misunderstanding of posts, commentary, which may or may not be factual, that are out there. The creation, the spreading, and the targeting of a deliberate online falsehood, can that have any constructive role in public debate?
So I would agree that the deliberate creation of things that you know to be untrue is probably closer to what we would see as a hostile act. But the sharing, which you mentioned, actually may be inadvertent. And because people have misperceptions, they would share and perpetuate those views because they think them to be true.
So you would agree then that in dealing with deliberate online falsehoods, the intent of the person, the platform, the product, the service that we are engaging with is very important.
Absolutely.
And I would assume from some of the comments that you've made, but correct me if I'm wrong or expand on it if you think there's more to it, that the impact of that falsehood matters, that there should be a difference if that falsehood
Yes.
perhaps impacts upon national security, race, religion, social cohesion, as opposed to...
Yes. Whether coffee causes cancer or not is immaterial to the larger social fabric, but there are online falsehoods that may have more dramatic effect on social fabric, as you pointed out in your earlier statements.
Cheers, yeah, no.
We shall believe the latter story for the sake of this conversation.
You better check that.
Well, just as an aside, Mr. Chairman, if you mind wearing my previous professional hat, everything causes cancer if you give enough time, and I'll take another swig of coffee. Okay. If I could now move on from your submission, Mr. Keerthi, to two other areas. You're familiar with the concept of the marketplace of ideas.
Yes.
The concept that allowing people to debate, to come up with points of view, with ideas, and having a contestable space is somehow required for the truth to emerge. There's this sort of Milton, John Stuart Mills, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and several other members of the US judiciary make this a central point of how they defend free speech. You're familiar with the...
I'm familiar with that, and it's part of the dialectic process as well.
Would you agree that for the concept and the vision of a marketplace of ideas to work, there are some preconditions that need to be present? And I'd lay out 4 of these for your consideration. The first is that this marketplace, whether it's real, it's physical, it's virtual, needs to be free. And I mean free in 2 senses, where the cost of participating is low or negligible, and there is an opportunity for free exchange of ideas. The second is that it must be public, in that people must have sight over the contestation that's happening within the marketplace of ideas. And the third is that it must be transparent and not manipulated. The fourth is that success in the marketplace of ideas needs to be determined by veracity, the strength of the truth. That if these 4 conditions are not met, then the concept of the marketplace of ideas fails. Would you agree with that, or would we have a debate on that?
It's quite heavy to process on...
Well, we can go through it step by step.
But I would agree that generally a marketplace of idea does require certain preconditions. Even within the forums that I participate in and I design, they are based on certain algorithmic requirements. So You're right, the free cost of participation, we make it easy to participate. The exchange of ideas is not limited. So the first point, I would agree. The second point, it is public. Everybody should be able to see, and that's actually part of the educational process for everyone. The transparency and success. We run a number of debates, both public as well as private, and we support many organizations and nonprofits, including One People, for private debates. Some of these debates have very specific, targeted purposes, and for those particular debates, I think there is value in keeping it to a closed group. So transparency is a concept I agree with, but transparency in practice, I think different organizations have different needs.
But at the very least, you require transparency amongst all those
Among the
who are
participants.
putatively engaging in the debate.
I would agree with that. And the last point, where success is measured by the strength of the truth that it arrives at, that's the desire. That is certainly the desire. That as a process of engaging with each other, as a process of this back and forth, you come closer to the truth, if not at the truth.
So, would I be right in saying that you would then agree that if those conditions are not met, then the process of the marketplace of ideas is not going to succeed?
I think it would have challenges, but I think with sufficient participation of an educated and informed public, you can still get better and get closer to the truth than without the marketplace of ideas.
So, Mr. Keerthi, I'm not challenging you on your prior suggestions that we need to have
Yes.
an educated, informed public debate in order to strengthen our social identity. I agree with that. The question is how, and what would serve as appropriate places and forums for that to happen. So you'd agree then that if these conditions are not met, the concept of a marketplace of ideas being successful would be impeded?
It would be impeded.
I put it to you that the social media space today is often held up as a marketplace of ideas, but is not just a poor proxy, but actually counteracts some of these ideas, some of these predicates for the success of the marketplace of ideas. Would you have any comments on that?
I'm not an expert on social media technologies, but the reason that I designed my own tool rather than relying on existing tools was because I felt that the quality of conversations on existing platforms may not meet my requirements, in particular the four that you mentioned.
But moving away from a specific platform or product,
Sure.
yours or anybody else's, the process of engaging online today is, I would put it to you, not public nor transparent, because messages are targeted to the individual on the basis of who they are, the demographic they fit in, their prior behavior, and there is absolutely no guarantee that that same messaging or that opportunity for engagement is afforded to your next door neighbor, your classmate, the person sitting next to you on the bench. In other words, you are sub-segmented as a result of how the technological platforms work.
So again, I'm not privy to how the back end works for these firms are, but again, the broader concern of filter bubbles and echo chambers is there, and I would agree with that.
So even if you have a website such as yours, the reality is a website such as yours often is accessed through social media.
Yes.
And so even if I like your page and my colleague here likes your page, we might not simultaneously see the same debate happening on your page because of our prior surfing experience and what Facebook or Twitter or Google has decided we need to see on that day.
That may be possible.
So if that was so, then the test of a public debate happening online doesn't get met. Because I might make a comment, and someone else who is similarly interested in that debate might not even see my comment as a result.
Understood. I think my definition of what is a public conversation is one in which anybody can go to it and there's no obstacle preventing you from joining it, as opposed to something that is forcibly broadcast to everyone. So a public hearing, for example, is one in which the doors are open. Anyone can come in if they want to and leave when they want to. And that's what I would use as a definition of public. Not that everybody must watch the news or must watch the information.
But if the control of that information is out of the hands of the individual, because I can't choose that Facebook treats my newsfeed differently from somebody else, then haven't you just argued that how the social media companies manipulate the feeds that are delivered to us actually obstructs that public process?
So again, I'm not privy to how they sub-segment the audience, and my hope is that everybody gets the post that I make. But if not, I'm not familiar with how they actually segment the audience apart.
Well, the process, without getting into the technical details, is that an algorithm decides what appears on your news feed or your Google search or your Twitter feed or your so forth. And that algorithm, over time, is increasingly user-centric.
Yes.
So the algorithm that serves me, the algorithm treats me differently from every other user on the basis of my prior behavior, as opposed to a public forum, which is then agnostic to who walks through the door. So would you agree that I'm reasonably concerned that this is not public in the definition that you have put across?
I understand.
Similarly, it's not transparent, because the extent to which that information provided to an individual is manipulated is not made known to the public. And we had a 3.5-hour session yesterday establishing the extent to which there's an absence of transparency. I mean, would you agree with our concerns that this interferes with the concept of a marketplace of ideas?
Broadly, yes.
Similarly, the extent to which this is not free, in the sense of now cost and payment, that although you can pay a social media company for advertising, overt or covert, a sponsored post or an outright advert, you can pay them as an entity, as a corporate entity, as an NGO, as a country, as a state entity, you can, as a political party, you can pay them to influence what the user sees, no matter how much the user pays. Well, they can't, but they are not able then to influence in the other direction. So when it comes to that requirement that the marketplace of ideas has a free exchange, actually the playing field is tilted in a very asymmetric way towards those people who are willing to pay.
That seems to be the case from what I can see.
So, and the fourth point is that success in the online space is not determined necessarily by truth, but by the ability for a given message to spread. Virality, reach, and the information that we've been provided suggests that falsity spreads faster than truth. So if you define success by how many people agree with it, the conventional way that the marketplace of ideas defines success, then in the online space, it is not truth that defines success, but how likely someone is to spread, share, and like it. I mean, would you agree with that? So if I put that up there as a precondition for the marketplace of ideas, and I've now suggested that the social media engagement fails on all four, I put it to you that my worldview is that the social media space is not just a poor proxy, but if we accept it as a proxy for the marketplace of ideas, we do that concept a disservice.
So in my personal view, social media serves a very specific purpose for social interactions and social networking. And the reason why I designed a separate platform again is because I felt that a social media platform meant for social networking is not optimized nor designed for robust discussion and debates of policy issues. And I think, therefore, measuring a social media platform by the standards of robust and responsible public debate, I'm not one to do that. So I just wanted to highlight a little bit of discomfort with that line of argument.
Well, I put it to you that you're actually agreeing with my discomfort,
Yes, yes,
and your way that you have solved that problem is to create your own platforms.
Yes.
That you don't believe that adequate, robust, free exchange in an unbiased, respectful way happens on social media to inform a useful political debate, and so you've created your own websites.
I believe that social media serves a different purpose for me. I use it to connect with friends, and I engage with robust debates on different platforms.
Were you concerned with some of the testimony given yesterday, the submissions given yesterday by the tech companies about their behaviors and where they're going with this?
I'm not an expert in that domain. I do understand some of the challenges that they face, because as a owner of a website myself, I also face some of the challenges. But I definitely agree more can be done.
If I could then lastly bring you to the issue of legislation and regulation.
Yes.
So assuming that we do all the above, all of your suggestions, I mean, whether or not operationally it looks exactly as you've described it, but we take your point that education is important and we need to continue to deal with this and invest in it and support it. I certainly agree with you that we need to make an effort to make sure that the facts are made available and get out in a timely manner, and that the method of delivery of those facts matters just as much. How you make those facts available through engaging platforms with reach and impact. Those are your three broad points. These then become a precondition for public debate, which is useful. But assuming we have done all those, and there are plenty of places in the world that have done all of those and continue to do more on those things, deliberate online falsehoods still spread.
Yes.
And would you agree then that even having done all those, legislation may still be necessary?
Yes, I would agree. My only hope is that the law is able to be nuanced, and I'm again not a lawyer, but I hope it's able to be nuanced in such a way that individuals who have genuine misperceptions, who are keen and willing to learn and engage each other in ideas and exchange of ideas, even those that are based on educated guesses that turn out to be wrong, are not now afraid of participating in online conversations because of the way that the law is framed or phrased to capture all potential spreaders of incorrect information. Because, because there are individuals who are doing it maliciously, but there are individuals who are doing it out of genuine misunderstanding. And if we can separate in some form, factor, some way, the law for those individuals and assure them that they are not being targeted by such a law, I think that would be very helpful, sir.
So your support for legislation and regulation is conditional upon some differentiated approach, depending on the person, depending on the intent. As a person, I mean the reach of whoever does it, whether it's a platform or a person.
Yes.
The intent, whether it's malicious or inadvertent.
Yes, and the impact of the information itself.
Okay.
My concern is that a law such as this may inadvertently deter genuine conversations from happening.
Which is not the intent, but we are quite focused on deliberate
yes.
online falsehoods. So you largely agree that if we've had a legislative approach that focused on egregious, impactful, deliberate online falsehoods, which are likely to have real-world consequences, whether those real-world consequences are national security, our social cohesion, our race issues, and religious issues, that may well be necessary.
As long as the areas that I particularly am concerned about are addressed, I have no objections to such a proposal.
You have no objections, but do you think it may even be useful in terms of dealing with the spread and the... I mean, if you've already agreed that the status quo is unreasonable, would you agree that this is a necessary step together with all the other steps that are put in place?
So perhaps I just, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not familiar with the full extent of what laws currently exist that can already address those issues, and so it's not my place to comment on whether a new law is necessary or current laws are sufficient.
Okay. Well, there are a number of people who are, we've had Professor Goh from SMU, the Dean, and several other people who explain that there are legislative gaps because our current broadcasters, our current local content providers may well be covered by some of those laws, and then there are other people who are currently not covered by some of those laws, and some of those laws will affect things at a time frame that is quite different that we need to address. Okay. So people have expressed a need and a wish for gaps to be closed. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Keerthi. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rahayu?
Thank you very much, Mr. Keerthi. May I just say that I'm actually very impressed and heartened by the efforts that you're putting in. Many years ago, I was involved in Malay debates, for many years also after that, I was also trying to encourage debates among young people. But it brings me to a certain point of also really understanding and appreciating the challenges of encouraging that debate. I think to some extent you've already addressed some of my concerns, but I wanted to just add another dimension of the complexity of this, reaching out and encouraging positive discussions, because the reality is, I mean, you've worked with youth, and I think, you've realized that there are many different archetypes of youth. And this is an age-old problem. There will be youth who will just not want to be engaged. There will be youth who want to be engaged. There will be youth who will be concerned about more of their day-to-day issues. So I wanted to get your perspective on this in terms of the actual effectiveness, or in terms of encouraging this debate. I think that's a lofty ideal that we're reaching towards, to get everybody involved. But the reality is that you'll have a large group of people who will be almost voyeuristic to an extent, just consuming news and just taking in things. And we've heard over the past few days, last week also, about the effect, how our heuristic tendencies will impact on the information we consume. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this in terms of your your efforts in reaching out and the limitations it has, and why some efforts need to be put in place to encourage or really moderate certain behaviors such that people know that some things are wrong. So in that respect, I'm a little bit, I want to seek your clarification, because I see where you're coming from in that we don't want to penalize people overly, especially if it was, inadvertent. Clearly, our focus is on deliberate online falsehoods. But how do we manage those kind of behavior where people don't take responsibility and they're not actually pulled in because of the fact that they want to debate, but because, casually this information comes to me and I want to just share it, and that is not right behavior. How do we moderate that? How do we encourage that amongst the youth, especially with the background of the complexity of the different archetypes and the different appetite for wanting to seek information and actually wanting to debate? Your thoughts, please.
Thank you so much for the question, ma'am. You're right, it is challenging to encourage broad participation in debates from the debater perspective or the debater's role. But the way that we have set ourselves a target is not to make everyone a debater, but to make everyone appreciate debates. So in a school, if there are 5 or 6 students who are debaters and they are debating for the school, there are 30, 40, 50 students who turn up to watch that team participate. If that team does well, the audience grows. Our experience with some schools that did not have debate traditions in the past, when the team does well, the school suddenly becomes much more appreciative of the role of debate and the performance of their debaters. So even in schools that traditionally do not participate or appreciate debates, it's possible to engage them through debate, but not to make everyone a debater. And in the course of the few years that I was the president of the Debate Association Singapore, we expanded debates from just the top few elite schools to now pretty much every secondary school, about 70, 80 primary schools, and every junior college in IT and Polytechnic. And just having a team alone means that there are people that can go and watch it. So it is possible to increase the exposure, but you're right, there will still be people who will not be exposed to debate or choose not to be exposed to debate for various reasons. As to how to manage their bad behavior, I remain hopeful that education is still possible for young people who are not aware of the impact of the information that they're sharing. And a large part of the efforts that I am pursuing is to give them a light-hearted, non-threatening education that the facts that you believe are facts, or the information that you believe to be sharing is not quite true. And so when I approach young people, I try to take as non-threatening an approach as possible. My concern is that there is a potential for them to misinterpret and misunderstand the intention of such a law, and it would have a chilling effect on their participation or desire to participate in debates. So I appreciate and understand the challenges, but I remain hopeful.
Ms. Chia?
Thank you, Mr. Keerthi. Actually, my point has got to do also with the debates. Again, I share Rahayu's view that we're very heartened that there are people like you outside who are trying to encourage greater participation in political discourse as well as social discourse. And that is indeed good and healthy for us. Again, I also want to emphasize that we are not looking at legislation as a first resort, but that if possible, we want to calibrate the responses and do what you call a nuanced approach. Now, coming back to the point on social media and your very interesting point that social media is social media. It is for us to communicate with our friends and share photos and so on and so forth. And actually, that's exactly the point that was made by 2 professors, or at least 1 professor and 1 research assistant from the University of Munich, in which they actually posited that social media is and political discourse are actually not fitted for each other. Because social media was never designed for political discourse. And if we talk about freedom of speech and debating, democracy, we need to have debates. And yet, social media is a place where typically it's easier to consume information than to engage in debates, rather than, yes. So, and for that reason, up to a point, the cramping of I wouldn't say cramping. What any restriction on social media expression may not truly go to the root of political debate. Now, I'm not saying it will not impact freedom of speech, but it may not necessarily go to the root of political debate. It may, but it may not. So from that perspective, I'm wondering what you might have to share with us about how you think social media can be used positively to encourage not just a consumption of information, but actually healthy debate. Thank you.
I encourage all of my young debaters for many years now to participate constructively in online conversations, that they are intelligent, that they are trained in the art of respectful discourse, and they should use that skill, both offline as well as online, to make a difference for the betterment of society. So I think the only way that I can do it is to train people to learn how to comment online, to discuss issues respectfully, and not to degenerate to disrespect after a certain amount of disagreement, but to continue to engage constructively in online conversations. And through their behavior, through their role modeling, others will see and hopefully emulate. My belief is that if we can shape enough influencers in an intellectual domain, not just in the social media kind of the influencers, but if the social media influencers actually can provide intellectual leadership, my hope is that we can do some good.
You think that's workable to provide, not just bits and pieces of wisdom here and there, but actually thought leadership on a social media platform?
I think it is workable. I think there are individuals who I already do see on social media sharing thoughtful, balanced commentaries on issues,
Yes.
engaging constructively, and inspiring other young people to emulate their style of conversation.
Yes.
And I think the more we have of it, the better it is. One of the fundamental traits of people who are in the volunteer sector is that we are unabashedly hopeful about the future, and I remain hopeful.
Thank you. And so social media is helpful. It is not a bane. Neither is it necessarily good. It's really how we use it. And so as a community, we need to be responsible. If we advocate freedom of speech, we need to exercise that right responsibly. And if we advocate any form of legislation, we must also be conscious not to, in any way, unduly restrict that freedom. But ultimately, the overall good must be that of the community and the country. Is that correct?
I would completely agree with that.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there no more questions? Mr. Keerthi, thank you very much for your time and your participation in this select committee process. We'll be sending you the transcript of this morning's proceedings. Okay, please go through them carefully. If there are any mistakes or any corrections that need to be done, please correct them and send the transcripts back to us. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I invite the next witness to the witness table, please?